Well, Mike, thanks for joining us today. This is take two because, as I just told you, I forgot to hit the record button. And that actually has happened before, not anytime recently, but, as the host, you look down and you're like, why is it not recording? Oh, you're an idiot. So anyway, thanks. Take two. Thanks for being here, Mike. It's great to visit with you.
It's wonderful to be here, and I like listening to your voice so much. This is just wonderful.
Well, they say I have a face for radio, so I'm glad that you are at least enjoying that. Now, you're joining us from Georgia. Is that where you're from originally?
No, I'm from Abilene, Texas. Grew up outside of the city, actually, in a little bitty place called Elmdale, right off of I-20.
Okay.
And we were in the country, raised quarter horses, did a whole lot of things like that, hunted and fished. My dad introduced me to shooting and hunting. Killed my first whitetail when I was 5, not in that area. We didn't have deer in that area when I was growing up in the Abilene area. Now they're all over the place there.
I was telling you, my buddies are in Buffalo Gap, and every evening these deer, and they live in like a, kind of a, well, Buffalo Gap, I would say, is rural anyway, but they live in a neighborhood.
Yep.
And these deer just come out of the woodwork everywhere. And I don't know where they stay during the day, but there's a lot of deer around there.
Well, I scared a doe here out of the big old doe, and she had a bag on her, so she's got some fawns sitting down in somewhere over here. But I scared her when I got up the other morning. So we have to say, I love seeing them. I can watch whitetail. It doesn't have to be a buck. I just love them because they were my first big game animal.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the one I shot in San Saba was a doe, and she was probably the size of an over large jackrabbit. I'm probably misremembering how big she was, but she represented. They talk about totems. She really represented a totem for me. She was my first big game animal. They drove her to me. On this, everybody chipped in and said, we're not going to shoot it. This little 5-year-old doesn't have a deer yet. So anyway, it was a sweet, sweet memory.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you went to Texas Tech.
I did. Yep. We moved to Lubbock. I say my wife and I moved. We met in Abilene in high school, believe it or not. And we moved to Lubbock, did my undergraduate there and my master's, and then we headed overseas to Australia for 6 years, where I did my PhD and my first research position, postdoc is what they call them. So
interesting. So what years were you in Australia?
We were there from 82 to 87, beginning of 82 to the end of 87.
So that was before they had their big gun buyback thing with the mass shooting that they had in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. There was, we still know them though. Actually, we know a lot of target shooters there who do a lot of wonderful competitions there. And I did not take any of my firearms with me. I just didn't want the hassle, but we had them available to us there.
Well, it's changed a lot from the time that you were there to today, no doubt.
It is.
And I've interviewed guys from Australia that have to predator hunt with an over-under or side-by-side because they can't have a semi-automatic shotgun.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But,
crazy.
But anyway, okay. So then now you're at the University of Georgia.
I am. I'm a professor in the genetics department. I went nuts and told them I would do the head of the genetics department for a year as an interim. So that's what I'm doing right now as well. The wonderful part of it is that, conservation through sustainable use, i.e. through trophy hunting, is one of the topics that I write about a lot for various magazines and a recent book that you know about and that sort of thing. And so it's conservation biology, and that's what I've done a lot of my career. And so the university is real happy with me being able to reach into that and try to bridge the gap between geeky academics like me and the real people out there who are the hunters and the conservationists who are actually putting their money where their mouth is.
Right. What about that term trophy hunting? I think it has a negative stigma attached to it, and it is unwarranted because, well, a trophy is in the eye of the beholder, first of all. But for me, as I am a trophy hunter, and I'm proud to say, like, I'm going after the oldest, most mature male, and a byproduct of that is he's probably going to have the biggest headgear, okay, which is what I want to put on the wall. But I'm trying to outsmart the one that is at his peak or past his peak of in prime of like breeding, and you're matching wits with one that's outsmarted hunters before you. So that, the experience taking that mature animal, and then the headgear is a bonus. But that's a trophy. I think people that aren't hunters have turned that word into something nasty.
It's interesting, at this forum, they were talking about trying to rebrand. And one of the things that they wanted to rebrand over there, this was all these African leaders from, countries all over the place.
And you just returned from Mozambique? Was it
That
where
is
you?
correct. Yes, Mozambique. I was in, sadly, I didn't get to hunt. So I was in a five-star hotel's conference room. I would have rather been in the bush, but it was
Right.
great. But I got to meet all these leaders, and they were talking about rebranding, to try to help people understand what we mean by sustainable use. Or I call it, look, I call it conservation through trophy hunting, because that's exactly what it is.
Right.
And community development through trophy hunting. That's what it is. Our communities in North America and the US in particular, because of the Pittman-Robertson Act, because people like us are going out and hunting, we have a lot of money pouring into the states every year, and so we have billions of dollars coming through from our pockets into as hunters and shooters. So I'm not embarrassed by it, and I am not ashamed of it. I'm like you, I think that I told them at this conference, I said, you don't need to rebrand. We just need to explain what we do.
Right.
We need to explain where that money is going, and what percentage of the animals are actually being taken. In Katahdin 11 that I wrote the book about, 45,000 Cape buffalo, and they take 120 bulls a year. Now do the math,
Right.
but those 120 bulls pump protein into the community, but they also pump tens of thousands. Well, you and I both know.
Right.
I mean, they're worth hundreds of thousands of dollars for the local community, because they're getting 20% right off the top. So it's that sort of thing that I'm really excited to tell people about who are not hunters. Anti-hunters are not going to be convinced.
Right.
Let's face it. And you and I don't have to be convinced, and your listeners don't have to be convinced, because we're on the other side of that. But my wife, who is a non-hunter, not an anti-hunter, she's gone on all my safaris and been my videographer and photographer, but she doesn't have any desire whatsoever to hunt. She just doesn't. She loves shooting, especially PDWs at old cars for some strange reason. That is one of her favorites. But she loves shooting, but she just doesn't have a desire to hunt. And so she is the one that I like to picture that I'm writing to. Not an anti-hunter, but a non-hunter.
It's the same as my wife. She'll go. Now we have 3 kids, young kids, that want to go to the deer lease all the time. So naturally, my wife wants to go to the deer lease to be a part of everything. No interest in killing anything herself, but likes being outdoors and likes eating everything that I shoot or the kids shoot. So I don't think she envisioned this being her life, but she's embraced it. So she's a good sport, and also puts up with me going on all of these exploits to Africa, a place that you've been to multiple times. I want to ask you though, when did you first get the bug to travel to the Dark Continent?
Well, if you'll bear with me for a second, this is going to sound a little bit morbid, but it's not intended to be. 2017, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and I was given a year to live. So I went through a bunch of surgeries and the chemical treatments and all that sort of thing. And it whacked me around. And my older brother by 5 years, by the way, who is in Mozambique right now hunting, and I hate him. He's in Katana 11. I convinced him to go across there to where I love hunting. But anyway, he called me and said, look, why don't we go hunt? He could tell I wasn't feeling well. And we talked about hunting in the West because we both love the Western US.
Mhm.
Hunted elk multiple times, black bear, pronghorn, you name it, mule deer. So anyway, we talked about that. And then I said, he had been to Africa once, to South Africa. And I said, what about if we go to Africa if I can get strong enough? Well, 2018, I went on my first trip, and that was to South Africa. And a wonderful safari. Goodness gracious, just a magnificent safari. And then from that time on, I've gone multiple times each year back to Africa to various places. So.
Okay, so you've explored it a little more than I have. I've been 5 times, but it's all been to the Eastern Cape of South Africa. So those darker corners they're pulling at my heartstrings a little bit. But I think, South Africa is where everyone goes to dip their toe in the water. And,
well, South Africa, we were in the Eastern Cape as well. I mean, let's face it, Cable, you could never go anywhere else but the Eastern Cape. And it's so species rich.
Oh yeah.
That it's hard to shoot it out, right? I mean, it's hard to collect every trophy species that they have there. And I sure have. So I'm going to end up back in the Eastern Cape again. In fact, I'm going next June, believe it or not. And
I'll miss you. I'll be there the last week of May.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll see you at the airport bar. But you took a leopard. So that is something that I think there's a few permits in South Africa, but that's like at the top of my bucket list. I'm going to have to go somewhere else to get that.
Yep. I went to Namibia to get mine, and it was boy, it was a sweet hunt out in the middle of nowhere. So I got that, and I'm looking at my leopard right now over your head, and I'm also looking at the hide off of the mountain zebra that I got, and the little springbok over there that I got in the Damara springbok. So I didn't take a lot there. I also took a picnic while I was in Namibia because I'm trying to collect all the tiny tins. So.
Okay. So how many do you have now?
9, and I don't want to talk about what I don't have because I know darn good and well you probably have shot one, and it's a steenbok. The most
steenbok? They just run around everywhere in the Eastern Cape.
Shut up.
Yeah. Oh
See,
my God.
My brother even, this is how nice he is to me. He said, look, I've got 2, I'll sell you one. But everybody seems to have multiple steenboks. But my very first African animal, I wrote an article about this called The Strangest Client, because I was called that. My very first African trophy was a Valreebok.
Wow.
That's first species I shot in Africa. We went they picked me up at the airport. We drove up into the mountains in the Karoo, and I hunted a volley and got him. He's very big. So, I didn't even know at the time how big he was, really, how large he was compared to normal ones. But so he was my first species. But another PH asked me, expecting, I think, impala or normal stuff, hey, what was your first African trophy? When I got back to the main property, and I told him the volley, and he did a spit take. So probably the strangest client.
My college roommate has gotten into hunting later in life, has done very well in the business world, and now he has the means to play around. And he went to Africa with me last summer, and his first animal was a Cape buffalo. Like,
that is fantastic.
Spoiled. Yeah. And we got there and we had a few drinks the first night, and he didn't even go hunting the first day. He was too hungover. He didn't want to go. And the PH was like, what do you want to do today? And he's like, oh, let's go get a buffalo. He's like, maybe an impala would be better, No. So they hunted buffalo for a couple days, and that was the first thing he got. Crazy though. But the steenbok, they do run around everywhere. But the one that I shot, it was really cool because it turned out to be an awesome hunt. We got up on this rocky ledge, and he was like down in they call them the lands, but really they're fields. And he was in like a wheat field, but bedded down, no shot opportunity. He had to stand up, and it took, I'm not kidding, 2 hours for him to like finally stand up, and I'm laying there prone, like my back's cramping up. Finally, the PH is like, he's standing up. And these things probably weigh, what would you say, 25, 30 pounds?
Oh, at the most, yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
And he's like 400 yards away, and you got to make this perfect shot. I mean, it was cool, and ended up dropping him. But
What did you
very,
use?
I shot him with a 7 mag, which they think, oh, you don't want to shoot these little animals with these big calibers, but yeah, you do, because you want the bullet just to go right through them and not blow them up. So you really have to pay attention to your bullet and rifle combo. So that, well, I mean, my buddy shot his blue diker with the 375 H&H.
Yeah, that's
like
actually
20 yards.
good. Yeah, it's really good because it's just going to go right through and not open up.
Yep. So let's talk about the Zambezi Delta, because anyone familiar with the safari community, or international travel, if you've watched Nat Geo and some of these things, you probably have heard of the Zambezi Delta. But the Zambezi River is more significant than that. It actually flows through a bunch of countries. It starts in the Congo and through Angola, Zambia, borders Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, before reaching Mozambique and eventually emptying out in the Indian Ocean. But there are two significant hydroelectric power plants on the river that provide power to Zimbabwe, Zambia, and South Africa and Mozambique. So this river is extremely important, and obviously for us as hunters and conservationists, we love it. But talk about that. And you hear about the Delta. Is the Delta specifically in the Mozambique stretch of the river, or where's that like geographically?
Yeah, mostly what you're looking at is south of the river, and the deltaic area. It does spread to the north a little bit as well. The river also is a biological. You and I were chatting about this earlier, but I forgot to mention it's
that was on take one.
Yeah, it's a biological boundary. So to give you an idea, I shot my sable antelope in Mozambique. And it's called a common, right? I mean, it's just supposed to be the normal sable antelope. It's south of that river. North of the river are Roosevelt sable, which are smaller and browner. Okay, beautiful, but I mean, they're smaller and browner. When the Zambezi is in the dry season, it's just a trickle, and those things move back and forth. And I'm almost positive to what they have right there in the area that I hunted mine, which was a beautiful black sable with 42-inch horns or something. I mean, it was a beautiful animal, but they're still a little smaller. And I bet you any amount of money they're hybrids. And I work on hybrids as a geneticist, so I love it. If it's a hybrid, that would be just fine with me. So it's also a biological boundary for a lot of distributions of things that we like to hunt, which is interesting. But also the deltaic area is so rich. Think of southern Louisiana, where you have the mouth of the Mississippi. It used to, before the Corps of Engineers got a hold of it, it used to flood every year. Now it still floods some. We see that. And of course, that was devastating for the human populations down there. But what happens when it floods, quote unquote, goes over its banks, it takes all that silt and lays it down. And that's why that area is so rich in southern Louisiana, still to this day, even though it doesn't silt up as much. But that delta region near the Zambezi River, i.e. where it's about to go out into the ocean, it spreads out there and it forms this unbelievably rich soil, plant life, animal life area. So the hydroelectric dams have affected its flow a little bit, but not like, say the Mississippi River or something like that.
Okay. Generally speaking, I mean, it's a wildlife oasis, just like, I love Louisiana redfish and crabs and the duck hunting. I mean, all that. So it's an oasis. And when did you first experience? when you first experienced the Zambezi Delta, was it on a hunting trip, or was it to, you know, to undertake this project, Bringing Back the Lions, this book that we're going to talk about?
Yeah, it was both and. So we spent months there last year. I was supposed to go in 2020.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I still, you know, I held on to my tickets as long as I could. And of course, Mozambique stayed closed all through the end of the year. The only country that opened up was Namibia, and one of my buddies there, that's how I ended up hunting my leopard there, is because my buddy was really struggling. They opened up Namibia. He's an outfitter there, Jamie Trout, and I hunted with him. Now, you know, it was wonderful, and I felt terrible about it at one level because they were giving away these, you know, fairly inexpensive hunts, but they needed the cash. So anyway, so I went to Namibia. So last year my wife and I went for the first time for, you know, I mean, we went for months, but we went in May and then we went back in July. I was heading back in December. Fortunately, I'd collected everything I needed for the book. I was going back in December, and the Friday before I was supposed to leave, our current president, shut Southern Africa down, and I could get there, but I couldn't get home. If you remember, Omicron came out, and so he decided that under advisement that he wasn't going to let anybody back in.
I don't think he's decided anything. I think
I'm trying to be nice here now, Cable.
We're living in a weekend at Bernie's, like in real life. Like, who's back there pulling the strings for this moron? Geez.
So anyway, that happened. So I had to cancel that trip. But fortunately, we've been over there. I got the funniest thing we did while we were over there is, believe it or not, the TED organization, you know, TED Talks, they asked me to give 2 TEDx talks on conservation through trophy hunting. And sure, so we filmed them over there because they were only doing virtual ones. So we filmed them in camp, and then in an abandoned village was the second one. And I was able to have those posted, and they went up onto the TED site, and people really seemed to appreciate them. So that was one of the weirder things we did. But
you mentioned you used this term trophy hunting.
Yes.
Which I think has, in modern times, it has a negative stigma attached to it. It's not warranted. I'm a trophy hunter. I'm proud to say it. To me, that means you've matched wits with the oldest mature male of a species, one that's probably at his peak or past his prime as far as breeding is concerned, one that's been pursued by hunters before you, and the headgear, the antlers or horns, are just a byproduct of his age and his wit. And so I'm proud to say I'm a trophy hunter, but and I think a lot of it is social media, but the other side has taken that word and twisted it into something that's nasty.
Yeah, I think that what we can do as hunters is to communicate to the non-hunters, not anti-hunters, but non-hunters, what we mean by trophy. My wife was amazed when she went on safari with me to Mozambique the 2 times for the weeks and weeks and weeks we were over there. The very first animal I took on the first safari was one of what's called a pygmy antelope. It was a Sunni, and he had a big chunk out of the bottom of one of his horns. He was blind in one eye. I mean, he was at the end of his days. I mean, it was obvious when and the PH knew it. I could have gotten one with longer horns, probably sharper horns, but I wanted the old ones. Right. Same way with the bush buck I got on my second safari when I was there. This old guy didn't have a scrap of hair on his forehead. He was, you know, it was like leather, and his ears were just bald, and his horns were real long, but I mean, they were still worn down some. So yeah, I think also though, we need to communicate. Okay, we go over there and we're hunting in this area. The carbon footprint, this is one of the things that my friends and academics and biology love to talk about. The carbon footprint that hunters lay down is non-existent compared to, say, photographic tourism. And I have nothing against photographers. My wife is one, and I love photographing stuff. But for example, a viable photographic safari area in Africa, is torn up. It just is. It's crisscrossed with roads. The boreholes that they have drilled are draining the water table down to get the animals to come to certain spots so we can photograph them. It has huge amounts of places for folks to stay compared to a hunting camp. And so that footprint is huge. And I think people need to understand that's one benefit of hunting. But the other benefit in these rural areas, and this is, this time I was in Mozambique recently because of this conservation forum, the African locals need this money to improve their quality of life, to get protein to their kids from the animals that are taken, for example, but also protein to their kids, carbohydrates to their kids, fields and things like that they can develop, clinics, schools, etc. They don't have any other means of income except bushmeat trade, i.e. poaching.
But you hear all the time, at least I do, that there's this guy called the Real Tarzan, and he has an Instagram page, hundreds of thousands of followers, and he's always interacting with like lions and tigers and pythons that are twice the size of you and me. And he says stuff like, trophy hunting is BS. Those communities do not need the money. It's basically white imperialism where they're, have these locals that work for them for pennies on the dollar. That message is out there too. I've seen it firsthand. I shot a Cape buffalo. We took the buffalo, half of it, to a school that was paid for by hunters, where there was a well drilled for the kids, paid for by hunters. I played soccer on a field that was paved and leveled with machines paid for by hunters. And the kids and the teachers sang and danced in appreciation for that protein. So yeah. I know that message is out there, but it's a lie.
Well, and it really is. And, the ironic thing is the Real Tarzan a black guy?
I'm not sure. I don't think he is.
I bet he's white.
Yeah.
So let me tell you what, I was interacting with some Tanzanians from, they were from the government agency that does sustainable use, the hunting concessions and all this. And I apologized to them. And what I said to them was, for my country. And I said, and for the anti-hunters, because at this forum, one of the things that came across over and over and over again was that what the Black Africans needed to do was to unify, and they are, and to get the message out there that their communities are in desperate need of hunter dollars. And these are not, folks over here guessing what the Black Africans need. And ironically, when I was talking to him, I said, what this really looks like to me. And the guy from Tanzania said, racism and imperialism. And I said, yeah, telling you how to use your resources.
Right.
Exactly what the Real Tarzan is doing. That's exactly what our anti-hunters are doing. That's exactly what our government is doing right now, trying to get trophy bans in.
I hate it. It is racist and imperialistic to dictate to them how they have to manage their own wildlife. We gave them the playbook. We said, here's the model that works for us. Look around the world. There's not one that works better. Here it is. Utilize it.
Yeah.
They said, okay, we're going to do that. 10 years later, we're like, no, we don't. That's not good enough. Now we want to tell you how to do it.
Well, and
the Real Tarzan is he does look like he's African-American though, but this is, and just to put him into perspective, this guy killed a monster crocodile, had to be ancient. And he goes, on today's episode of Stupid Humans, these guys from Texas decided it was a good idea to track down a legendary Nile croc they heard rumors of. So they killed it. Sad world we live in, man. The dinosaurs survived hippos, other crocs, snakes, lions, leopards, but the human was the one to take it out. Shame on us.
Well, I'm real sorry that
right, but he's who's exploiting. He's running around with these caged animals, making a living doing that, saying it's just hypocrisy at its finest. And
it is. But the thing about it is, we can, I believe, turn the narrative around. And once again, we're not going to convince people like him, and we're not going to convince PETA, and we're not going to convince certain groups of folks. But that's not our goal, right? It's
Right.
not even to turn non-hunters into hunters, I don't think, although that is wonderful if we can, especially if they're young, young ones, young kids and that sort of thing. I love to see that. But it's really to communicate why, at the end, why it works for ecosystem restoration and recreation, and why it works for community development, why this model works, and why we should not be telling. You may have seen the meme. I was talking to Larry Weishan a couple of 3 weeks ago, and he brought it up from Facebook, where these 3 or 4 Black Africans are sitting around a campfire out in the middle of the bush, and one of them turns to the other and says, "You know what I think they ought to do with their white-tailed deer in Texas?"
Right. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. How would we take that?
How would we take that?
We would be royally pissed, but yet we're doing it to them, and it is absolutely racist.
Yeah,
You're,
it
it is. I want to talk about the book, obviously, and I want to start with the invisible line, and I want you to, because I thought that was pretty telling, and I want you to talk about what you mean by that and what you saw firsthand.
What happened was the very first time we flew in, and I'm looking forward to going back to Katahdin 11 next year, hopefully to do a write-up for Sports-Afield on cheetah reintroduction there. But as we were flying in, you come in a helicopter from Beira, from the Beira airport that you've flown into. And as you come from the Beira airport and head towards that Zambezi Deltaic area, what you're doing is you're heading towards not just one hunting concession, and its Portuguese language is Catada. Okay, it just means hunting concession. So there's a series of Katadas there. Now, I was heading for Katahdin number 11. Okay, Mark Haldane's Katahdin number 11, or Zambezi Delta Safari's Katahdin 11. But as you're going, it is just bare. It is bare earth. There are a few huts scattered around, grass, palm leaf covered huts scattered around with a little bit of fire coming up. And then you notice that there is a haze out there. And so I asked my pilot, "What's up?" He said, "That's charcoal production." And so what they've done in that area is cut every tree down, and they turn it into charcoal for the folks living in the cities. And as you're flying, all of a sudden you hit a wall of vegetation, i.e. the canopy of a forest. The invisible line that we're talking about there is that line and what causes it to be there. The line between total devastation of habitats, of animals. Of course, nothing is living out on that bare, as far as you can see, except for a few humans. So, and there are a few animals like goats and cattle, I suppose, in some of those areas. And so you hit that line, and the invisible line is, when you get down into the Katahdins, you find out that line represents a demarcation, a cutoff from hunter-gatherer and slash and burn agriculture, and a middle-class Sena villager who now has plenty of protein, so he and she don't need to poach for their kids or themselves. They have plenty of protein coming in. They have infrastructure built, like you said, by hunters. Everything is paid for by hunters. Mm-hmm. Now they employ, this guy's talking about pennies on the dollar. The rule in Mozambique and elsewhere is you have to pay them just like we do here. It's minimum wage or higher, and they pay them higher. Okay, so
and they get tips, and if one of them gets fired, the line's going to form to the left to take that job. Because I asked him, I said, I've asked through translator, asked my tracker, "Do you like this job? Does it pay well?" Because I wanted to know, are we exploiting these people personally? And he was like, "I love this job. It's the best job I've ever had. I can feed my family. I have a place to live, not in extreme poverty like you see a lot of the third world. I mean,
Mhm.
It's not as nice as your house or my house where their quarters are, but by their standards, they're living high on the hog.
Yep. Well, to give you an example too, just health wise, so Mozambique has one of the highest, if not the highest, I can't remember now. It has 46% malnutrition among like 0 to 5-year-old kids, okay, across the country. In those Catatas, it's 0. Okay. Now that malnutrition, you see the swollen bellies and photos and that sort of thing. That's called kwashiorkor. That is protein deficiency. Everybody's like, oh, we need to, help them be able to plow up land and plant maize. They don't need maize. They need protein. They need meat. And in their case, and it's going to be in the case of Catata 11, they even put in a fishing program, and they did it wisely. No nets. You have to fish for them with hooks and that sort of thing, no nets. And you have to get a little disc that says you have a fishing license. You don't have to pay for it, but you have to have it so that they don't have fish poachers coming through, okay? So they need protein, and that's what the hunters are paying for. They, 8 cubic metric tons or whatever of meat that they give out every year, and then their fishing program. The people are well fed. Now, do they have an agricultural field that's also paid for by hunters? Absolutely. They put it in a centralized location, and then they also put in a clinic, they put in a school, all of it paid for with yours and my dollars.
Right.
Okay. And they asked people if they would voluntarily move from their scattered villages in this Catata to this centralized location. They didn't tell them they had to. They didn't bring in the police or army. Everybody wanted to move there because they had the centralized, they knew, first of all, they were being fed well, but they also had a centralized area. If they wanted to set up a little shop, they could do it, which they've done, and pay for it with their earnings from Zambezi Delta Safari and the hunters that are going over there. But they have this agricultural field plowed by a tractor bought by the Michigan Safari Club International with a huge old plow. They plow this 186, something like that, acre field 3 or 4 times a year, depending on how many crops they want to make, rice and maize. So anyway, I look at it and I go, this is not unique, though. You were talking about the model. This isn't unique. It's happening in Cameroon. It's happening in Tanzania. It's happening in Uganda. It's you name it. It's happening in South Africa. Okay, I mean, this model is penetrating into those local rural populations and changing their lives in community development.
Mm-hmm. There's no doubt. I mean, like I said, I've seen it firsthand. Why did the wildlife disappear from Catata 11? Because in the book you referenced like 30 years ago what it was like.
Yes.
And then in the name of the book is bringing back the lions. So what happened, and how did it get to such a bad place?
Well, so there was a war of independence from Portugal, and that didn't last very long. Portugal pulled out. Like most, it was similar time to Rhodesia and other places that folks were pulling out of, and rightly so. Okay. I'm not standing here or sitting here suggesting that the Portuguese shouldn't have pulled out, but when they pulled out, a civil war broke out. And so it was a 15-year civil war, and it was that Zambezi Delta area, okay, and the Catatas along in the Maromeo complex were known from hunters back in the 1960s, like you and me, if we were old enough to have been there, we would have known it as one of the most game-rich areas. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of animals of various kinds, buffalo, Cape buffaloes, and sable antelopes, and zebras, and you name it. So the locals knew it too, and the rebels went into that area and set up a meat processing plant to feed their armies that were all in the bush. So the whatever you would call it, government armies were in the towns and cities, and the rebels were out in the bush. So the rebels set up this meat processing plant And the buffaloes went from, goodness gracious, the game counts right before that Civil War were something like 60,000 buffaloes. They went down to 1,200. The sable antelopes were in the tens of thousands. They went down to 30. The water bucks were 28,000 was the last estimate. And they went down to something like 250 animals. So you had this crash. And so that's what drove it. Was, we can call it just mass poaching, but it was actually just a meat industry. And it was poaching, obviously, but I mean, it was a meat industry. And so when Mark Haldane and Carlos Faria took over that area as partners, Carlos, by the way, being a non-hunter and a non-fisherman, I write about him. He's in chapter 1 of my book. Right. And I asked him, why don't you hunt or fish? You know, you bought this area, but he's in tourism. He's into tourism. And anyway, I asked him, it's just a little anecdote, and he said, oh, it takes too much work. You know, it's just you got to get up too early. It's cold, you know. So anyway, but when they took it over in 92, they signed the peace accord in 92 as well in Rome between the rebels and the government army. There were just hardly any animals. And so their very first
there's a quote from the book. It says there's more bodies of dead soldiers and villagers than there were animals left in the entire Maramayu.
Yeah, Maramayu
complex.
Yep.
That describes the devastation of this Civil War.
Absolutely. And it displaced everybody. I mean, I've forgotten how many millions of folks were displaced. And of course, they lost millions as well to starvation and to battles. And so it was completely denuded of animals that they could have eaten. The little pygmy antelope probably fared the best because the poachers wouldn't have wasted a bullet on them as much as they would have on the bigger stuff, on the larger meat caches, if you will.
So, and this is just I mean, obviously the book's about Katahdin 11, but it's a microcosm of what's happened all over Africa.
Yep.
And the recovery process is something that can happen.
Yes.
Elsewhere. And it is happening in places like where I've been where I hunt in South Africa. A lot of it has been clear cut for agriculture. The places that have the wildlife is where hunting occurs. You know?
That's right.
Yeah.
No, so, I mean, yeah, if you think about it, you know, I mentioned 30 sable antelopes just to give an example. In 92, now they have over 3,000, probably closer to 5. They haven't done a game count in a couple of years. So it's probably, I mean, they're all over the place. This is one of the very few areas that I know of in unfenced Africa that actually is just exploding with sable. It's over carrying capacity for Katahdin 11 in most of those areas right now. So
what is the first step in trying to bring the wildlife back? And it might not even have to do with the wildlife. It might have to do with the people.
It is, and you're exactly right. They did 2 parallel things, if you will, and these make sense. I mean, they're just make logical. It's a logical conclusion. Number one, they had to start feeding the people who were there. They had to get that malnutrition rate down. They had to give them protein. So every time they shot a Cape buffalo, that went straight to everybody, you know, the people there. And every time they were able to hunt whatever, and they started building up, they give 10 pounds of red meat. They have the fishing program right now. They give 10 pounds of red meat per family per week throughout the year, actually. Even during the wet season, they're out there doing stuff. So they give that, and then they have their fishing program. Well, they didn't have that many animals to give them 10 pounds right at the start. So they gave them whatever they could. But the population of folks were gone from that area too. So it was a nice balance where as people moved back in, the animals were increasing. So that was the first thing: feed the people protein, give them the protein. The second thing is anti-poaching. And they started out small. Now they have a huge number of folks working on their anti-poaching squads. But then they started out with a few men who were poachers, prior poachers. I mean, who are you going to get to, know where the snare should be, where the gin trap should be, where the poachers might be, other than those who know exactly where they ought to be, because
my
they're,
PH always says that the best trackers are former poachers. So
yeah, these guys are freaking amazing. We went out on an anti-poaching team training exercise. My wife and I did it, and it was not, I mean, they had sent somebody out there who was not a poacher. Well, he used to be, and just told him hide, set up a camp, hide, don't tell us where you're going. And they had to find him. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing watching them see a bent grass and leaf of grass and just, or grass, and just say to us, okay, this is where he was. And I was blown away.
when I shot my Inyala, the tracking effort just to find, because they had spotted it and then he disappeared. And now I'm trying to get into position to make a shot, and I don't know where this animal is. No clue. And they tracked the thing, not in dirt, not in mud, on rocks. I was like, how can you decipher where this animal went? We're literally walking in like rocks. And sure enough, I'm just watching this tracker just pick it apart. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, there are some really good trackers here. And if you're a bow hunter, I bet you are one of the better. I'm not. Okay. I'm not a good tracker at all. The only way I could track elk in the West is if there's snow on the ground or mud.
Right.
I have a hard time. So I'm just saying we do have some good trackers here, but it's nothing like what we have over there.
Yeah. Yeah. So the anti-poaching effort is second. Feed the people, and then anti-poaching. Was this area, Katahdin 11, wiped out of vegetation as well, or had that been left unmolested?
No, it was impacted by the slash and burn. I mean, it even recently, before all of the folks decided they wanted to move to this centralized location, you come to what they call Inyala Gardens. And those are old homestead areas where they have set up their machambas, the gardens, by burning the trees or girdling them or whatever and knocking them over. And so you'll come to these areas and they're growing back, okay, because the people have left. But when they came in, there were large areas that were actually highly disturbed, old village areas. In fact, I did the 2 TEDx talks there we filmed while we were there about conservation through hunting. And one of them we did in an abandoned village. And so, but it's growing back up, it's regenerating.
I believe our mutual friend, Ivan Carter, played a role in helping recover some of the larger megafauna species, specifically the lions. So at what point in the process did we get to where we're like, okay, we have enough buffalo, enough sable, enough waterbuck, but we can reintroduce a pride of lions to this area?
Yeah. So, well, if you ask some of us, we would automatically say that Ivan and Mark Haldane, who are good friends of mine as well, and they feature in the book obviously as well, were just insane to reintroduce lions. There were a bunch of us that said, you do understand it. I gave Mark a hard time on one of these safaris this last year when we were there for months. And one of the lions, as I recall, nailed a big, beautiful sable bull. And I said to Mark, I just want to point out how much is laying on the ground, right?
Right.
It just got eaten by lions.
Thousands of dollars that was from a hunter's checkbook.
Well, see, the thing about it is, though, they're visionaries. Ivan and Mark and Carlos and all these, Dan Cabela, and Mary Cabela, they're visionaries. And their vision is, yes, recreate and raise the quality of life of the folks who are living there, the Sena villagers. But their parallel vision is to have all of the species. Their vision is to have all of the species that were there prior to humans coming through. And one of the species that was there were lions. Now, they would occasionally get a lion in, but they're sort of what are referred to as soft boundaries. There's no fences or whatever, but you have villages and things like that. So it's real hard for a lion to get in there. So they knew if they wanted lions back, they were going to have to actually raise the finance of millions and millions of dollars to be able to bring lions in from various places, 6 places in this case from South Africa, and to put them in and then take care of them. Okay. And that's what they did. They have 24 lions that they brought through. Now they're over 80. And that's in 3 years, 3-ish
wow.
years. Yeah, 4 years, I guess. Now it's bumping up against 4, but 80 healthy animals. I mean, healthy pride structure, the whole 9 yards. And they've
So-
lost a bunch of the originals. So
Is the goal then to also offer sustainable harvest of lions?
there will be lion hunting in Katahdin 11 at some point in time. The deal with with Mary Cabela, who is obviously the matriarch of Cabela's, and she's the head of the board, was that the original 24. Now she's hunted. I asked Mary, but before I say what I'm about to say, let me point out one thing. She's not against lion hunting.
Right.
I asked her, how many of you hunted? She said 6. She said, I don't think I'll hunt another one. But so she's hunted lions a lot.
Right.
So she loves them, but she also realizes sustainable use. But her deal was, and the Cabela Family Foundation's deal was that the original 24 would not be hunted. Okay, even though the males would get old and end up either having to be transported somewhere else or they would just die. That was the deal. And they didn't want to hunt the original 24 anyway. They wanted population to build up. But no, there will be sustainable use of lions. Absolutely. I mean, that's the plan.
So these other Katahdins in that region, because there are other hunting concessions there, do they have lions? And what is their reaction when this group says we're going to put lions in our Katahdin? Well, those lions might get out.
And they do.
They might leave.
They do, and they bring them back. Actually, they have a whole fleet of helicopters and vets on call and that sort of thing, and they get them back to Katahdin 11 because they have collars on them, the original ones anyway, and then they recollar a bunch of them as they go. No, the hunting concessions around there were. I mean, Ivan and Mark and all of them, they all talk, and they all talked about this and about the potential for income. Okay, because I've heard the figure 150,000 bandied about for Mozambique lion hunting. I could imagine it would be even higher. But every time you take a male that's not in the pride and that sort of thing, you're going to make that kind of money. Okay. And that money, once again, 20% goes straight into the Sena Villagers bank account. So they love it, but also it then pours right back into more conservation efforts and that sort of thing. So no, they were discussed with, and yes, they could get out, and yes, they will eat other people's game animals. That is true.
Yeah. Okay. What about the leopards? And you mentioned cheetahs earlier. So the lions they reintroduced the lions, and then they're like, now we're going to take on these other.
The leopards were there. Okay. So, but they were smaller populations. And the reason is because of all the snares. So how they hunt leopards there are with dogs and at night. And some people have problems with hunting with dogs. I'm looking at my Wyoming mountain lion right now. We hunted him with dogs, and it's one of the hardest bloody hunts I've ever been on in my life, chasing after dogs. And
18 days over 3 trips to Colorado to get mine.
Oh, wow. Well, you know how selective it is too, right? I mean, you get up there and it's a female and you go, whoops, nope, not going to take that one.
We caught 3 females, and I actually ended up killing a female because it was on we were hunting public land. My 3rd trip was so I wanted to do dry ground because I was like, that's really cool. And then I know I'm going to be with a good houndsman if he can catch one on dry ground. So I wanted to do that. So I went, spent a week, didn't get one, called the wife like on day 7, was like, when do you have to go back to work? She's like, don't do it, you son of a bitch. Get home now. I stayed 3 more days, didn't get one, Went back the next December, did it in the snow, and we caught 3 females, let them all go. And then the first day of my 3rd trip, day 18, go onto a private ranch. A lion had killed 2 foals, and the landowner was like, you can hunt here, but you kill what you catch.
Yes.
This thing is killing my livestock and it won't stop.
No.
So it ended up being a female, and the houndsman, who's caught hundreds of lions in his life, has only killed 1. Personally, him. He's like, well, either you have to kill it or I do. And I said, well, I feel like we've earned it. We did it on dry ground, and it's pointless for you to kill this one, and then now we have to go kill another one. I was like, this seems like the right thing. And
Oh yeah.
we put the work in. So yeah, but that hunting with hounds, hunting big cats with hounds is awesome. So that's how they do it there.
That
Or
is,
at night.
yeah, and they do it for two reasons. I wrote about one of the chapters is called "Catching a Leopard by the Tail," and that was for darting and collaring. It was part of the Cabela Family Foundation's work there. So they do research with the leopards. But the leopard population, when they came in, and I was talking to the houndsman who's from South Africa, and I said, how do you see the anti-poaching difference? He said, well, number one, we have lots more leopards here, because he goes there very, very often. They call him in for collaring or hunting. And when Mark Haldane first went in there, and I mentioned this in the book, when he first went in there, he and Carlos, they had 4 permits from the government. The government said, there's big enough leopard population for you to have 4 permits. They hunted for a couple of years, a couple of seasons. And Mark went back to the government and said, I need you to reduce it to 2, because we are not able, and we think the leopard population is much smaller than you think. So he gave up, $60,000 or whatever the heck he gave up in the early days when he needed every penny, because he wanted the leopards back at a good level. So the anti-poaching has removed the snares, removed the gin traps. One of the things the houndsman said, obviously, was, okay, yes, there are more of them, but he said what we haven't seen for years now, and he's been there for decades chasing these. He said, we don't find them with missing paws. We don't find them with missing legs. We don't find them with snare injuries around their necks, because he said they've cleaned this area out, and they keep it cleaned out. And so that was amazing. I hadn't even thought about that as being, but he said we would very often find, whether we were hunting them or whether we were collaring them, we would find them with missing paws or whatever. So
Right.
So that's what
interesting.
the leopard population has increased. They're doing a good job of it. The cheetahs were not there. Okay, they used to be historically, but they reintroduced the cheetahs last year, and they've reintroduced more this year. We were there for both reintroductions last year.
Okay. And what about like elephants, rhinos, stuff like that? So
elephants, they have, let's see, what is there? They just released, I'm going to get this number wrong, maybe 6. Mark Haldane sent me some information, 6 problem males, young males from another area in Mozambique. They went out and darted them and then trucked them in and released them in Catata 11. But I think they have, is it like 600 and some odd elephants, something like that in the Catata. Now that is way down because of poaching in decades gone by, but it is building now. They don't hunt elephants there in that area, but they do. And okay, so you asked about rhino.
I'm sure they will eventually if the population keeps going up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No. I mean, they could, if
this whole thing is built on sustainable use hunting in that
absolutely
model.
Oh yeah, no. They will not hunt. It's just that the ivory is small, because you're going to have to let that population, those individuals get older. Yeah, they're going to have to age, because of the poaching was horrendous once again during the war, but also right afterwards. So now it's building up. So it'll get to that point. Black rhinos were in that area. And I asked Ivan Carter, when I interviewed him for his chapter in the book, I said, tell me what what's next? And I asked Mark Haldane the same thing. He said, well, look, what we would really like to do, 3 of the species we're discussing are, one of them was jackals, which should be there, but they're not. One of them is African wild dogs, which should be there and they're not. And then the other was black rhino. And I said, so which one are you going to go for? And he said, well, there are problems with all 3.
Right.
Said, the main problem for the jackal is, he said, I'll ask you a question, Mike. You're writing this article, these series of articles for Sports-A-Field. And I said, yeah. He said, if you went to Diana Rupp and asked her, does she want an article about reintroducing elephants or reintroducing jackals? What do you think she would say? She said, and I laughed. And he said, the point is, raising the money to move jackals in is going to have to come out of our running money. It's not going to be something we can probably go to sponsors and say, hey, we want to reintroduce jackals. He said, African wild dogs, go ahead. But African wild dogs and rhinos, he said, absolutely. We can get the money in a heartbeat. But the African wild dogs, how are we going to keep them safe from snares and traps that are outside of this area? And he said, until their population increases enough, because it's an alpha female who has the pups each year. Nobody else is reproducing but her. So it takes a while. And then he said, and I said, well, what about black rhino? And I thought I knew the answer. And he said, Mike, we don't have the boots on the ground for black rhino. He said, when you have the Chinese hiring militias to go in and get the rhino horn in these areas because it is worth more than cocaine, it is worth more than gold, more than diamonds by weight. He said, you name it, it's worth more than that. It's worth them to shoot it out with people. And he said, we have to think about that. You know, what is it going to take for us to protect the animals once they're here and with a non-fenced area?
So I have 2 points of reflection there. Number one, my PH pays anyone on staff $20 American per jackal if they shoot it.
Mm-hmm.
Not a fan of the jackal, but yet just like our coyotes, the
Yeah.
jackals aren't going anywhere, right? You can't get rid of them. You don't want to get rid of them. It's like a just never ending game of, well, you know, if we do it at the right time, we can maybe make a dent and protect some species when their fawns are on the ground or whatever. But you're never going to get rid of the jackal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they did in Catawba 11, obviously. But if there was no food there, then of course, then there's no predators there.
Right.
But then the other thing was where I darted my rhino, which was another internal struggle for me of whether or not this was exploitation or whether it was really a viable hunting effort through green hunting, we'll call it. And I told my PH, I told Carl, I was like, this is one that's really, I'm not sure about. I'm pretty tepid on whether I want to do this or not. And we talked about it. And of course, we're filming everything for his YouTube channel for John X Safaris. And I walked away from that experience thinking, okay, this is a good thing because you want more rhinos or less rhinos? Okay, I want more. The telling point for me though was the place I was on. I videoed 2 lions mating. And the owner of the property was like, please don't put that on social media. I was like, yeah, no problem. It's your place. But can I ask why? And he's like, well, we're one of very few properties that has lions and rhinos. We're going to put the rhino on social media. People are going to see that. And then if you put the lions, they're going to know where to come poach my rhinos.
Mm.
And he's like, and what you're doing here today, helps fund the anti-poaching effort surveillance that we have to have on the property 24/7, 365.
Mm-hmm.
So, I walked away from it being like, okay, as long as my only thing was if these rhinos are getting darted every other week, that's problematic for me. Like, but they weren't, and they've gotten a lot stricter on those policies and stuff. And, but yeah, so they hate the jackals and, anti-poaching certainly across Africa, anywhere that there's rhinos, you're going to have it. And you're going to have it nonstop.
Yep. It really is true. So yeah, so those are the species that they're thinking about. And there are others, all right, that they would probably like to get back in there as well, but they just have to, they have to answer questions. You know, do we, first of all, is the habitat there that used to be there while those animals were there? Is the habitat still there that they can exist in? You know, what do the locals think about, say, for example, bringing lions in? And then what do we have the money and do we have the expertise both to move them, whatever animal it is, to move them, but then also to take care of them?
So Katahdin 11 is what we're talking about in the book, but that's just a word, like you said, for hunting concession. What about Katahdin 10, Katahdin 8, and all these other places I'm assuming exist?
Mm-hmm.
Are they doing similar things, or was their habitat not devastated to the extreme level that Katahdin 11 was? That's one question. And then secondly, how big is this Katahdin and relative, are they all relatively similar in size?
So first off, the first question, yeah, this whole area was devastated, and people have, I mean, and not just in the Zambezi Delta area, but because that's a wet area, obviously, but in the dry areas around Mozambique. I mean, these areas were all poached out for the most part, if there were humans around, and there were during the Civil War in the bush. So, Katahdin 4 to the south, to give you an example, is in a dry area. They've asked Mark Haldane to start over again, like he did in Katahdin 11, and there's nothing there. And it's a dry area. It should have giraffes. It should have kudu. It should have, you name it. And all it has right now are hippos and crocs. And that's what they'll live off of for, hunting for a while until the rest of them build up. Now, so they were poached out, yes. Katahdin 11 is 500,000 acres, obviously fenced, but there are other Katahdins there that are over 1 million. And there is one that was bought by a wealthy person, and it doesn't allow hunting on it. And so they basically fenced it off and, and are not allowing hunting on it. But the rest of them are Katahdins in the truest sense of the word. They're all sustainable use areas run by operators and outfitters. So
they haven't brought lions back to these other places.
No, well, one of the other Katahdins right next door is one of the ones that had bomas in it as well for the lions. They met that operator when I was in Maputo, Mozambique, for this conservation forum, and we were talking about it. I gave him a copy of my book because he's in it. We talk about his Katahdin, and I talk about it in a Sportsfield article about the Lions, update on the Lions. But anyway, so they helped, but then the release and where they keep the lions now they don't have a fence, but where they bring them back to, if they get out and say get in a snare or a gin trap or something, they bring them back to 11. So
okay, fascinating stuff. Turning money into conservation, break that down for us. It's part of the book.
Yeah, so that is a quote from Ivan, and that is their mantra for his organization, his Wildlife Alliance. And what he means by that is that you have money brought in in Katahdin 11, every penny is from hunters. Now, it may be the Cabela Family Foundation, who are passionate hunters, and they're donating money or whatever for helicopters, or Dallas Safari Club or Michigan SCI or whatever, but it's still $100. And so what that means is you have a model of, we keep saying it, of sustainable use, what I call conservation through trophy hunting, because you and I, neither one wince when we hear the term trophy, but
I'm like, how big was it? Tell me about it. I want to know, how big were those antlers? How old was that deer? Tell me.
I know. I love it. That's the way I am too.
Did you look at his teeth? Were they worn down to the gum line? That's a good trophy right
my
there.
My warthog had no teeth left. Yes, he did. Yeah. So, but so it is that sort of sustainable use model. That's what Ivan is talking about, turning dollars into conservation. We can also say turning dollars into community development, because they go hand in hand in these rural areas.
Okay. All right. Well, I got to tell you, I enjoyed the book. Thank you so much for sending me a copy. I encourage everybody to check it out. Bringing Back the Lions, International Hunters, Local Tribespeople, and the Miraculous Rescue of a Doomed Ecosystem in Mozambique. I hope to get to go see that place for myself someday. And I don't know what I'll hunt there. Maybe a leopard. But I thoroughly enjoyed it and have equally enjoyed the conversation today, Mike. Thanks so much for making time for us. And when are you headed back over there?
Well, I go back to
June?
Africa, in June, to South Africa, to the Eastern Cape. Yours and my favorite place, I think, in South Africa. So I go back there to hunt black wildebeest. I pitched the idea to a magazine, black wildebeest, and one of those, I don't have a bush buck from there, one of those really dark coated bush bucks. I'd really love to get one of those. You may have one already.
I do. Yeah.
And so I think those are gorgeous. So I'd like to do that. And then it's called Bush Bucks and Birds. I'm going to go up into the mountains and hunt gray wings, and probably down in the flats and hunt snipe. Blouser is wanted me to take a couple of firearms over, and one of them was a shotgun. And I said, sure, that
Right.
So, I mean, if you're going to provide it, I'll sure as heck take it with
I
me.
know what the price tag on some of those Blousers are. So yeah, that's
Well, they're not giving me the firearms,
right.
Just so you know, I have to send them back, and I've just said that on a public.
That's why I love Mossberg, because they don't ask me to send them back. Yeah.
There you go.
I've taken quite a few Mossbergs over there. I shot my buffalo 2 years ago with the 375 Ruger, and I don't know what I'm gonna hunt in May though. Carl and I haven't really talked about that. Last year we did a giraffe, which
That's cool.
That we were very careful in telling how we told that story in the video. We even called it, I think the name of the video was "Why Would Someone Hunt Giraffe?" And we estimated that the bull that I shot was 27 years old, had broken off one horn. You talked about an antelope you shot over there that was blind and had a big chunk out of his horn. Same thing with this guy. And but it's one of those species that people get all worked up about. I just look at some animals maybe are more like aesthetically pleasing to look at, but it's still just an animal, and they all need to be managed the same way. So
they do. And people don't understand with giraffes, just as an aside, they're so destructive. They are so destructive to vegetation. They clip off the crowns of trees.
Yeah.
So you got to keep their numbers down, or they're gonna wipe you out. So.
Absolutely. Well, very cool. Well, safe travels on the next trip. Like I said, we'll be crossing paths over there about the same time. And are you going to do so in Georgia? What do you do to fill up your time during the fall? Are you going to do deer hunt?
Yeah, I go out deer hunting. I also really love predator hunting. And so I have a buddy who's up in South Carolina, and now I'm looking at my bobcat that he got me. And so we have gone and gotten skunked literally on coyotes. He hasn't. He's shot a bunch of them. But I have shot at a couple of coyotes and missed them. I'm embarrassed to say with him, but I'll probably go up with him when it cools off. I want to go prep. Yeah.
So I'll show you real quick before we get off here. This is my. Oh, well, that's my. I'm trying to show you my lynx.
Right? Oh, I see it.
Right there. The sun's it's actually chasing a pine marten. And that pedestal rotates 360 degrees. So if I just turn it on, it's pretty cool.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed it, my friend. It's nice to make your acquaintance. Like I said, enjoyed the book. Folks can find it, I'm sure, on Amazon, wherever.
Yes, they can, or just type in bringingbackthelions.com, and that'll take them to the page where I sell it, same price as Amazon. But anyway, they're welcome to do that, or go to Amazon. That's right.
Well, I love a good conservation success story, and this one certainly is a model, I think, that can be implemented in other places. So very interesting. And thanks again for the time. Certainly enjoyed it.
Thank you.